Long ago, there was a king in India known as the Lord of Horses due to his exceptional skill and connection with horses. Despite his popularity, he was unhappy because he had no children, which was considered a great misfortune. He prayed and made sacrifices at various temples, but nothing seemed to work. In desperation, he sought the advice of the sage Narada. The king asked, "How can I please the gods? I've been married for 5 years, but still I have no heir." Narada advised, "Build a new temple dedicated to Brahma, the creator." The king promised to construct the most magnificent temple in the land. He ordered his best workers to build a temple taller than any other, adorned with gold inside and out, and with 100 steps of pure white marble leading up to it. Within months, the beautiful golden temple was completed, surrounded by flowering trees and shrubs. The king visited it daily, making offerings to Brahma and his wife, Savitri, hoping for a son. One day, while making his offerings, the king saw a figure emerging from the flames of his sacrifice and heard a sweet, clear voice filling the temple. It was Savitri, wife of Brahma. She said, "You have pleased me with your devotion. What do you seek?" The king, trembling, replied, "Goddess, I desire a son to carry on my name." Savitri responded, "I will give you a daughter." Shortly after, a beautiful daughter was born to the queen, and the king named her Savitri after the goddess. As Savitri grew, her father began to think about her marriage. He decided to let her choose her husband from among the princes of the neighboring states. "Daughter," he said, "do you wish to marry? You may visit the palaces of our neighboring kings and choose a husband for yourself. I trust your wisdom." Savitri chose to search for her husband among the hermits in the forest rather than among the wealthy and royal. She prepared her chariot for a long journey and ventured into the wilderness. After several hours of travel, the chariot drivers informed Savitri of a nearby hermitage. She and her handmaidens approached a small temple and a hut made of leaves and branches. Inside, they found an old man, blind and white-haired, but with an upright bearing. He was a king who had been blinded and driven from his kingdom by a rival. As Savitri watched the old man, a youth on a black horse rode up to the hut. Although dressed like a peasant, he carried himself like a prince. When Savitri saw his face, she knew he was the man she would marry. The youth dismounted from his horse, greeted the old man warmly, and went into the hut. Savitri told her handmaidens, "We don't need to search any further. Let's stay with these kind people for a few days, then we'll return home." The old king welcomed them and shared his story. He explained how he, his wife, and their son, Satyavan, had been driven from their kingdom, Shalwa, 20 years ago, and had lived among the hermits in the forest since then. Satyavan watched Savitri and quickly fell in love with her. Soon, Savitri and Satyavan vowed to marry, but Savitri insisted on returning to her father's kingdom first to get his consent. She promised to return and be with Satyavan forever. Savitri went back to her father's palace, where he was consulting with Narada. The sage suggested it was time to find a husband for Savitri. The king said, "Here she is. She will tell you if she has found a husband." "Yes, father, I have," Savitri said as she knelt for his blessing. "He is poor in dress and possessions, but he is a prince by birth. And his name?" the king asked. "Satyavan," she replied. Narada looked horrified and said, "No, princess, not Satyavan." Savitri insisted, "There can be no other." The king asked Narada, "Is something wrong with the youth? Is he not what my daughter thinks?" Narada replied, "He is all that she says, but he is destined for an early death. Within a year, the prince must die." Savitri went pale, but gathered her courage. "Narada, you have foretold his fate. I can only pray and hope. But even knowing this, I won't change my mind. Satyavan will be my husband for a year, even if I must be a widow for 50. Narada blessed her, saying, "Peace be with you, daughter of the Lord of Horses," and left. The next day, it was announced that Princess Savitri would marry a prince from a distant region. Only her father would accompany her due to the long journey. They took many gifts for the bridegroom's parents. When the old king of the Shalwas heard their purpose, he was concerned. "How will your daughter live in this rough country? There are no maids to help her, and we eat only forest fruits. We sleep on the ground," he said. Savitri gently reassured him, and that evening when Satyavan returned from hunting, she married him. The only guests were nearby hermits who gave their blessings. Savitri removed her jewels and rich clothes, wearing humble garments instead. The Lord of Horses bid his daughter farewell and returned to his kingdom alone. Time passed, and Satyavan's love for Savitri grew as she became more beautiful and gentle. Savitri was happy, but as the foretold day approached, she became quiet and thoughtful. She stayed by Satyavan's side day and night, watching and waiting. One morning, the old king asked Satyavan to fetch some bamboo from the forest. Savitri decided to follow him forward and took his head in her arms. A shadow fell over them, and she became aware of a terrible form bending over her. He was tall and gaunt, greenish in way, but with eyes of a fiery red. He carried a noose in one of his hands. This was Yama, the god of death. Savitri rose slowly from the ground and, bending low before Yama, said, "What do you want, O mighty one?" "I have come for Satyavan, whose term of life is ended." And Yama leant forward and drew the prince's soul right out of his body. Then, turning to the south, he fled at lightning speed. But Savitri, too, was fleet of foot. Love lent her wings, and she followed close at Yama's heels. They came at last to the edge of the world, beyond which no mortal may pass alive, and here the god of death stopped and spoke. "Return, Savitri, you have followed far enough. Return and bury your husband's body with due rites." "No, great Yama," answered Savitri. "When I wed my lord, I vowed to follow him wherever he went or was taken. I have done no wrong since I made that vow, and so the gods have no power over me to make me break it." "That is true," said Yama, "and your answer pleases me. Ask a boon of me, but not the gift of your husband's life." Savitri thought for a moment and then asked that the old king of the shawls should regain his sight. "It is granted," said Yama. "Now return? No mortal may pass this spot alive." But Savitri stood her ground. She knew that no one loved Yama, that he was friendless even among the gods, so she decided to flatter him. "Is it true, O Yama, that a mortal is pleasing to the gods if she mingles with those who are virtuous?" "It is true," said Yama. "Then you cannot force me to go, for you are virtuous, and I become more pleasing to the gods every moment I stay beside you." Yama was delighted and told Savitri that, for her good sense, she might obtain another boon from him. "Then grant that my father-in-law may regain his former kingdom," she said. Yama assented and told her for the third time to go back and find her husband's body before it was devoured by jackals. "It does not matter," said Savitri, "if the jackals devour the corpse. Of what use is the body without the soul? Another body can be found for the soul, if it is released from your noose, but never another soul for the body." "You speak with more wisdom than most mortals," said the god. "Yet one more boon will I grant you." "Grant me 100 sons, O mighty Yama," cried Savitri. Satyavan cheerfully whistled as he reached the bamboo grove and raised his axe. But as he lifted it for the first strike, the axe fell from his hands and he collapsed. Savitri, following closely, knew the fateful moment had arrived. She ran to him and held his head in her lap. Satyavan took a few deep breaths, whispered Savitri's name, and then became motionless. Savitri realized he was dead. At that moment, Yama, the god of death, appeared to claim Satyavan's soul. Savitri bowed to Yama and asked him to take her life instead of her husband's. Yama admired her devotion but explained that death could not be reversed. Savitri continued to follow Yama, pleading for her husband. Impressed by her persistence and loyalty, Yama granted her wish. Savitri cleverly asked for sons, knowing she could only have them with Satyavan. Realizing he had been outwitted, Yama released Satyavan's soul. Satyavan's soul flew back to his body. Savitri returned to find Satyavan waking up, thinking he had just fallen asleep. Together, they walked home, and Savitri told him everything that had happened. At home, they found their parents rejoicing, as the old king's sight had miraculously been restored. Soon, a messenger arrived with news that the king's enemy had been defeated, and the people wanted their former ruler to return. The next day, Savitri, Satyavan, and their parents returned to Shalwa, where they lived happily. Savitri and Satyavan lived for 400 years and had 100 sons, fulfilling Yama's promise. Today, in India, when someone wants to give the highest praise to a wife, they say she is like Savitri, who brought her husband back from the brink of death. When you want to learn English, read, listen, and speak for 1 hour every day. Thank you so much for watching until the end.